no deal.
OK, let's move on. A few weeks ago, we heard from some of the thousands of people who've been hit with tax bills for tens of thousands of pounds to pay something called the loan charge. There was a huge response to our story. So here's Joan Owen.
I mean, I don't feel I have a life anymore. Everything's just been taken away from me.
This is not a sort of just punishment. This feels like it's almost vindictive.
That's all I do, is think about the loan charge.
The loan charge is a change in the law affecting mainly freelancers who worked using payment schemes that involved receiving their income in the form of a loan. HMRC say that these schemes had only one purpose: to avoid paying tax, because receiving income in the form of a loan means that income tax and national insurance were avoided.
It's never been compliant with our tax code.
But many of those affected say the schemes were perfectly legal, and that the government has moved the goalposts on taxpayers by changing the law retrospectively.
We're going back, in some cases, 20 years, though, and demanding, therefore, huge bills from people, which in many cases they just can't afford.
I want to understand why people decided to make use of schemes that involved receiving part of their income in the form of a loan in the first place, and whether HMRC are really being fair to people who are affected by the loan charge. Whilst working as a gas contractor, David was advised by his accountant to make use of a loan scheme. He was told the scheme had been endorsed by a QC and was approved by HMRC.
There was no great benefit in doing it financially, and there was never any mention of it being even classed as a tax avoidance scheme.
But in April last year, David received a letter from his scheme provider explaining the introduction of the loan charge, which might mean HMRC pursuing him for several years' worth of tax on the income he'd received through the scheme. Incredibly, the scheme provider then offered a workaround via another company that they said would reduce his liability. David paid a fee to explore this option, but eventually decided to contact HMRC directly. And a few months later, a settlement offer arrived in the region of £250,000.
Well, the first feeling was obviously shock, and then the anger kicks in, the frustration kicks in, the anxiety kicks in, and then the worry. You know, how are you going to deal with it? I mean, literally, how are you going to deal with this? How are you going to pay this? You know, are we going to lose the house? You know, do I tell the kids? Do I tell the missus?
He was later asked to repay the sum at a rate of £10,000 a month, by which time the scheme provider had disappeared.
And the website had been taken down. You know, the portal that we used to put our timesheets and everything in, that had disappeared. Phone lines were cut off, no one answering. You know, the phones just didn't exist anymore.
With David's permission, I spoke to HMRC about his case. They said that because he came forward to reach a settlement, he's not technically subject to the loan charge at this time. And they said that he would be able to ask for a longer period of time to pay the money that they say he owes. Kirsty, an IT contractor, first made use of an umbrella company who paid her through a loan scheme in 2001.
They didn't mention anything about any tax avoidance, because that wasn't my reason for joining them.
But in 2016, HMRC contacted Kirsty about the loan charge and sent her an initial settlement offer of £90,000 of what they said was unpaid tax.
I had no idea what to do, to be honest. I was just like, my whole world has just collapsed on top of me.
But as in David's case, the umbrella company she was working for offered what they said was a way out.
They mentioned some offshoring mechanism of reducing my tax liability. I felt uncomfortable with that, because that felt to me that I was actually avoiding, for the first time, I felt I was avoiding some tax, and I never intended to do that.
Things got worse when Kirsty sought specialist advice, but was subsequently defrauded by someone who claimed to be a tax professional. As a result of the fraud, she says she lost £70,000. Desperate to put her troubles behind her, Kirsty borrowed enough money to pay off HMRC. But earlier this year, she received another bill, this time for a much larger sum of money.
The figure was about just over 200,000, and I think I just broke down, really.
We're joined now from Central Lobby by the Treasury Minister, Jessie Norman. Welcome, Jessie Norman. Hello, the all-party parliamentary group that looked into loan charges, into this, concluded that, quote, these arrangements were not entered as aggressive tax avoidance. So why is the government now being so aggressive against these individuals?
Well, I don't think actually the government is. You'll recall that the APPG itself has the secretariat of the Loan Charge Action Group, and it exists in order to promote the case for the people who are affected by the loan charge. So it's not an independent vehicle for looking at this. I've looked very closely at this myself, the whole issue, and I've come to the conclusion that although there are definitely things that can be improved in the way in which HMRC deals with customers and in the clarity around some of the things that people have taken away from their interactions with HMRC, that the loan charge is a way of recovering a vast amount of tax that should have been paid and was avoided by tens of thousands of people.
But they were often a condition of employment, doing it this way, of employment in the public sector, working for government. So
Well,
you make it a condition of employment to be paid this way, and then years later you say, no, this is all wrong, give us a couple of £100,000. I mean, it just seems not fair.
Well, there's 2 or 3 different things going on in each case. Of course, the behaviour of many of the promoters of these schemes, in almost all cases, will have known that it was a form of tax avoidance and were indeed structuring it as such. And of course, in many cases, they have made a runner now or attempted to offer even more entrapping schemes to people who are subject to the loan charge.
And
But of
you're
course,
not going after these people.
Well, the difficulty is that unless they've done something that's actually illegal, it is very hard, and of course we're not seeking in any case to pass retrospective legislation that would allow us to go after those promoters. What we do also have, though, Andrew, is a group of employers, and the employers are in fact the vastly preponderant providers of the cash owing under the loan charge settlements that have existed so far. 85% of the money that's been raised so far has come from employers and only 15% from individuals, and we expect that to be 75% and 25% by the time the process is finished.
But we looked at one case study of a person who's now been lumbered with these loan charges, and he testified that he'd been told by his accountant that the scheme had been checked over by a QC specialising in tax and approved by HMRC. I mean, these people didn't think they were doing anything wrong. Indeed, in many ways, they were being advised to do it.
There may be some people in that situation, at least as they see it now. It is important, or indeed at the time, it is important to remind ourselves just how contrived these schemes are, Andrew. You have an offshore trust into which money is paid. It is paid out via a loan. A person gets a package of money every month through their PAYE up to the personal allowance, which qualifies them through the national insurance for a pension and means that first lump sum is tax-free. And then they get a monthly amount in the form of an increase to a loan. And of course, that loan has a document, but it's never expected to be repaid. It carries no interest. It doesn't carry any creditworthiness assessment or whether the person can pay. And this is a highly contrived form of tax avoidance. And of course, in some cases, there were, after 2004, there were disclosure of tax avoidance scheme numbers. And I'm afraid those were used by some of the promoters to suggest that the revenue had signed these things off. Of course, the revenue never signs off tax avoidance schemes. And of course, QCs or other people who've been brought in only offer advice. And ultimately, as I think you know, everyone is responsible for their own tax return.
Indeed, but you're going after these individuals for eye-watering sums of money as far as they're concerned. I mean, life-destroying sums of money in some cases. There's been stories of suicides, of people ending up bankrupt. You pursue them with huge aggression. Individuals, largely defenseless individuals. They may have been right, they may have been wrong in what they did. I take your point on that. And yet you seem to be just play footsie with Apple or Facebook or Google. I mean, Facebook had a turnover of £1.3 billion in Britain last year. Its tax bill, 7.4 million. That's it. Why don't you go after the big guys?
Well, you're running 3 or 4 different things together, Andrew. Let me just pull them apart separately. First of all, I am pleased to tell you that announced by me only a few days ago was legislation for digital services tax, which marks the beginning of the process of trying to recover
and we'll bring
proper
in peanuts.
tax Well, no, a couple of billion quid, but it's a temporary measure
Really?
while the international alignments between the different countries sorts out an international scheme. It has to be done internationally because, of course, this capital is mobile. On the loan charge, actually, it's not aggressive. HMRC bend over backwards. There is referral to specialist agencies if people are in mental distress. The core of this, though, is a significant body of people who simply do not wish to pay tax due. And I'm afraid behind some of these awful stories that you have described, and of course I can't comment on individual circumstances,
sure,
lies a bunch of people who are simply trying to avoid paying tax. And
All right.
I think that's an important focus, or should be one for you, Andrew, as well.
I understand that's your position, Jesse Norman. Let me just bring in Louise Casey here. I mean, when you see what's happening to these individuals, but to be paid with a loan that you're not going to repay, and being paid by a loan, loans are not taxable, it does seem a bit of a dodgy way to be remunerated, is it not?
Well, the rights and wrongs of that are neither here nor there.
Aren't they?
Well, I think that the fact of the matter is that this is retrospective application of the rules. Those people went into those tax arrangements in clear, honest faith, like the people on the programme didn't set out to defraud anyone. And I just think this is yet another example of the government being out of step with what the public want and feel. It's like they're going after these people, and it is aggressive. That's exactly the right word to use about it. We let the big giants off with nothing, and
Sure,
we're applying
but
rules that we didn't apply at the time.
But if you say you're going to be...
I'm not somebody that wants tax...
If you say you're going to be paid by a loan, and by the way, you won't pay tax on that loan, I mean, you're going to think that that's great, but is this really allowed?
But they did allow it. Now, I wouldn't have allowed it. I am Mrs. Pay Your Tax, and I don't like the fact people don't pay taxes, and I will screw anybody that doesn't pay their taxes. But the fact of the matter is those people went into it. The same way, the last time I was on this programme, somebody said to me, well, will it cost more money? And I said, yes. And they said, how are you going to raise that? I said, tax. And I'm hardly hard left. I mean, let's face it, I'm right in the middle of politics. So it's not like I'm not keen to make sure people that have evaded tax evade tax, but there's something unbecoming about the nature with which this government is kind of flying the plane when making up the rules as they go along. Like, these are just changing the rules halfway through. If we don't like the rules, change them. So your description of what you do, I agree. People shouldn't be able to avoid tax, whether it's me, whether it's somebody paid less than me, or whether it's a giant. But they were able to do that, and now with those rules, they've decided to change them and reapply them.
Jesse Norman, while we've still got you there, I want just to play you something of what Boris Johnson said last night, if you could just bear with us. Let's run that.
This kipper, which has been presented to me just now by the editor of a national newspaper, who received it from a kipper smoker in the Isle of Man, who is utterly furious because after decades of sending kippers like this through the post, he has had his costs massively increased by Brussels bureaucrats who have insisted that each kipper must be accompanied by a plastic ice pillow. Pointless, expensive, environmentally damaging health and safety.
Jesse Norman, is the Isle of Man a member of the EU?
Not when I last checked, Andrew.
So what was he going on about then?
Well, I imagine the Isle of Man sells into EU states which place requirements on product safety, and that's what he's complaining about. But listen, we can't spend our time commenting on humorous sallies in what you call a serious programme, Andrew.
He's the one that wants to be the next Prime Minister. He's the one waving a kipper around, and you're telling me not to be serious. And by the way, Mr. Norman, it turns out these are not EU rules. He got that wrong. These are British rules. These are British food rules, not EU rules. This is the man who wants to be our next Prime Minister, mixing with editors of national newspapers who for some reason carry kippers around in their pockets, and you want us to be serious.
Well, I'm surprised you don't take it with the levity that it obviously deserves, given the way you've described it, Andrew. Can we go back to one thing, though, which is that Louise was hopelessly wrong about the loan charge. These people have been pursued through the courts, in many cases through inquiries, and through many other circumstances over many other years. There's nothing retrospective about this loan charge, and I do think it's important to actually look at the details of this before making those kinds of airy statements.
Okay, I noticed you were very quick to get off the kipper.
No, I'll come back on the kipper if you want, Andrew.
All right, well, I'll ask you again. Given that the Isle of Man is not a member of the EU, and given that the rules on kippers are determined by the British government, not Brussels, what was the point he was trying to make?
Well, possibly the point he was trying to make in the context of the word kipper, which obviously has other ramifications, is that there is a degree of over-government that he sees coming from the EU. And, of course, let me give you another example.
But this wasn't coming from the EU.
Well, or not in this case, but he's pointing to a wider phenomenon which the EU, as he sees it, is part of. And let me give you a little example. Well, take the VAT on energy savings materials. We're just having to apply a VAT rule which increases VAT on energy savings materials. We'd vastly prefer not to, but unfortunately those are the rules by which we're presently bound.
All right. Jesse Norman, we'll let you go. We thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Liam and Miata, let me start with Liam. What do you make of this loan charge business?
Well, for years, these loan schemes were all the rage in the city. You had high-rolling traders using them. And by the way, their employers wanted them to use them because then they could pay them a lower amount of money for a net post-tax amount that they take home.
They also probably didn't pay national insurance.
Absolutely.
If I'm giving you a loan as opposed to a salary, I don't pay employers NI.
For a long time, the loan schemes were, many city guys would be talking about them. It was a lark that was mainly in the city. In recent years, that pattern, because they were so long established, went down the sort of income food chain, if you like. So IT workers were basically told, look, this is how you're going to be paid if you want this work. And so they would then check that very little of this stuff's written down. You have to pay huge amounts of money if you want to inspect the idea yourself independently. If you're an ordinary IT worker, like the superb brave testimony we saw there in that film, if you are told, look, a QC says this is okay, if you're told it's legal, it does feel really aggressive. Stop it going forward, but not retrospectively.
OK, let me hear from you.
So look, it's a really difficult one, but for me, the principle of fair tax has to hold, and we all have to pay our fair tax. And in the end, this is a system that was put into place to avoid tax. So I think, actually...
But avoidance isn't illegal. Well, evasion is illegal.
Well, yes, it's not illegal, but actually, when there are billions that should be going into our public services that aren't, I do think it's right that HMRC takes a tough stance on this. Now, where I think it's difficult is that there are people that have been caught up in it, and I think a degree of compassion is required. And to be fair to HMRC, they are talking about long periods. So I think there has to be a bit of discretion. But actually, I was really disappointed about his answer to what you do with the companies, the umbrella companies that were running these schemes, and why we're not going after them. Why are we not putting a fine on them for what they've done?
Let them go.
For accountants that have made millions advising people in completely legal ways in which they reduce their tax liability. Again, why are we not going for them? Let's put a hefty tax on them and think about a way in which we recoup the money that needs to go back to our public services through that.